This homework's looking at preparing an essay looking at love in Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet. If you haven't already, you should have your copy of the play with you. You should have a pen and paper or a device to make some notes. At any point, you can stop this and screenshot what's on the screen to save you making notes, print them, and then annotate them. So the question we're going to look at is, how does Shakespeare present love in this extract? And how does Shakespeare present love in Act 1? Now, the extract I'm talking about is in the corner, and you can see that it's the sonnet from the first time that Romeo and Juliet meet. The second part of the question, that second bullet point, refers you to talk about love in Act 1. Now, this is because we're at the start of the play. For your actual exam, this section will always talk about the rest of the play. Once you've done this essay and the notes for it, you'll have something to say about love at the start of the play, to drop into an exam essay about love in the play as a whole. On this screen, you can see a facing translation. Now, there are several of these available online, and they're different quality. This one is from a website called LitCharts, and it's the Shakespeare version. This is available on Firefly on the link that I've sent to you. The whole play is translated for you this way. The colours link the different sections together, because sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to follow which bit relates to which part. So the colours relate to the same ideas, the same sections. The Shakespearean version is on the left, and the modern translation is on the right. Just to make sure you're completely clear, you always quote the Shakespearean version. You don't ever quote the modern translation. So if we look through the extract then, and just make sure that we understand the sense of it. Romeo, when he first sees Juliet, and this is immediately after Tybalt has made clear that he's not going to forget the slight from Romeo, that even though Lord Capulet has told him to leave things alone, he's not going to. He says that the sweet will convert to bitterest gall, so sweetness will turn to poison for Romeo. Romeo sees Juliet, and then they speak to each other. So Romeo says, starting at line 100 on this extract, "If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss." Then if we look at the translation, he says, "If I offend you by touching your holy hand with my own unworthy one, my lips stand ready, like two blushing pilgrims, to smooth over my rough touch with a gentle kiss." Now, you remember that in class we talked about the word pilgrim. If you can't remember the definition of pilgrim, or you didn't write it down, pause this video and Google that definition, because you need to know it. Other words you might want to pick up on is this idea of profane. It's translated here as offend, but actually it's got rather more religious connotations. It's about offending religious feelings or sensibilities. Okay, so if I profane, think of profanity. A profanity is a swear word. It goes to kind of more than, I think, offence. It goes against sort of morals with religious connotations. So Juliet then, after Romeo has compared his lips in that metaphor, and note here it's a metaphor, in the translation it's a simile, but in the original it's a metaphor. They are two blushing pilgrims. He's compared his lips to those pilgrims, and they're ready to stand over his rough, to smooth over his rough touch with a tender kiss. Juliet picks up this metaphor Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, with which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Looking at the translation, good pilgrim, you're unfair to your hand. Your hand shows proper devotion by touching mine, just as pilgrims reach out to touch the hands of saints. Holding palm to palm is like a pilgrim's kiss. Okay, so she refers to praying there. So she says, don't do your hand wrong by basically calling it a rough touch. You are showing good religious devotion, because actually saints also have hands, and pilgrims' hands touch saints' hands. So if I'm the saint and you're the pilgrim, some touch can be allowed, but hand to hand only. None of this business with lips. Romeo comes back with his question, have not saints not lips and holy palmers too? So he moves the attention back to kissing rather than putting hands together. And Juliet says, I, pilgrim, so yes, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. So, lips are for praying in this metaphor, not for kissing. Romeo then refers to her as his dear saint. Oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do, come together, really. And then he argues that they pray. Grant thou, so grant me my prayer, lest faith turn to despair. Juliet comes back and says, well, saints don't move, though grant for prayer's sake. So there's that difference between moving physically and being moved emotionally. And Romeo says, well, move not, will keep still, while my prayer's effect I take. Now I say the translation here isn't exact, okay? My prayer's effect I take. He's telling her to keep still while he makes his prayers come true. He's taking their effect, which is basically keep still while I kiss you. This section here is actually inserted at various points depending on the editor of the version you're using. So don't worry if in the version we're using in class that appears in a different place. The sonnet starts with the line, if I profane, and it carries on for 14 lines down. Okay, so it doesn't matter where that kiss comes in, the sonnet ends 14 lines after Romeo says, if I profane. So Romeo kisses her and then says, okay, well, from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged. So actually you, my saint, have taken my sin away from my lips through kissing you. Juliet is very quick-witted and comes back and says, well, then my lips have got the sin, because actually you've just transferred it over. And Romeo takes advantage of the opportunity by saying, well, sin from thy lips, if your lips have got the sin, oh, trespass sweetly urged is, oh my goodness, you're asking me to do that again. Okay, so trespass is to go, to kind of physically go too far without permission. If you trespass on someone's land, you go there without permission. If you, in the Lord's Prayer, if you forgive us our trespasses, you're doing something which is against the rules and you're asking for forgiveness. So here he says, oh, you're asking me to do that again. Wow. Give me my sin again. So give me back my sin. And Juliet's comment, you kiss by the book, is ambiguous. She can mean, number one, you're great at kissing. Okay, it's actually, you kiss as if you've studied a manual on it. The second meaning, you could link in to that idea of Romeo kind of being a pretend lover, being the lover that he thinks he should be because it's fashionable. Like actually all his kissing has been learned from stories and ideas in terms of, you kiss slightly like you've studied it. Best answers, if you got this as an extract, Best answers would explore both interpretations. One might be, actually, you kiss by the book. You're great at kissing. You kiss as if, you've studied it. And secondly, it's that little nod to kind of, okay, is Romeo still studying form rather than the actual passion? Just in case you wanted the word ambiguity, it's that point where a line has more than one meaning. And then they're interrupted by the nurse saying, "Madam, your mother craves a word with you." From that, I check that you understand rather than that you've got hugely annotated. We're going to look at it in a moment. So this is just walking you through the sonnet form. There's an awful lot of information online, and I've put the web address that I've got these notes from up in the header. Okay? When you're looking at notes online, be careful of the quality. Some of them are written by teachers or companies. They tend to be a lot better than those on Student Room or Prezi, or just ones that students have done and uploaded to their own school's public intranet. Be a bit careful. For this, take your copy of the sonnet because you might want to add some notes in. So the dialogue of Romeo and Juliet's first kiss is a sonnet. If you remember, a sonnet is that 14-line poem, generally dedicated to love. It's got a regular rhyme scheme to it. The first sonnets were written by the Italian writer Petrarch, and he wrote that series of sonnets to Laura and about Laura, who did not love him back. Petrarch requited love. If you just got a little zoom thing on the screen, then I don't quite know what I pressed. Okay, so the dialogue is a sonnet. It's spoken by two voices, but it's still a sonnet. It has all the rules of a Shakespearean sonnet. The only difference between this and a conventional sonnet is that you get two characters speaking it. Normally a sonnet would be a monologue, a dramatic monologue, rather than this dialogue. Okay, dialogue means two speakers. You even get all the features in terms of the bringing together the twist at the end. So here you can see that actually on the line numbers, you've got your rhyme scheme counted out. It goes A, B, A, B. And just another summary to check we understand. Romeo's asking for a kiss, and there's kind of an alternative or a developed answer. If actually his rough touch offends her, he can kiss it away. Sonnets about... Oh, I seem to have added a slide there. The second section, the second quatrain here, is Juliet speaking, and she also follows a regular rhyme scheme, so C, D, C, D. So Juliet's equally clever. She says, he offends his hands because actually they're beautiful and smooth, but hands can touch together, and she has that reference on the palm. Then Romeo has line 9 with an E rhyme, Juliet line 10, F rhyme. Romeo then brings those ideas together with E and F. Shakespearean sonnets end with a rhyming couplet. And here they end with both speakers together, G, G, with line 14. So this page is reminding you that you have a copy of this sheet called What to Look For in the Extract. Whenever you get an extract question for homework or one where you're not in a timed environment and you can use your notes, I want you to have a copy of this in front of you. If you don't, you're making your life so much harder. One of the things you can do for your revision is you can learn the details on here to actually make sure you're looking for the right things in the extract. Again, you're aiming to try and get around 30% of your exam essay from an extract. This, in reality, means that you're going to choose 3 or 4 good points to develop. I would aim to have a range of techniques, okay? You don't just want 4 metaphors or 4 examples of alliteration or so. You want a whole range of things. It's also, with both the Shakespeare text and actually with poetry, it's also good to look really distinctly at form and structure. And here, your form and structure points. Look at rhyme, look at blank verse, okay? Look at whether it's iambic pentameter or prose. If you remember, iambic pentameter is the 10-line syllables. You'll see where the lines go long and short. Prose is normal writing. You start a new line only because you run out of space. Prose normally deals with either somebody being bad or being rude, or a character who is a bit more kind of base, a character who's not noble, whereas blank verse deals with nobility and dignity. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. Okay, so if you were annotating this, and you should have a copy of your booklet now to add to any annotation you've already done or to start it, you're going to put a note somewhere that it is a sonnet. That's important, okay? You want to say something in your notes about the regular rhyme scheme and the shared nature indicating Romeo and Juliet's love. Now you can see that actually I'm just doing that in note form. For a second part of your homework you're going to write it up, but for now when you're annotating, eventually in the exam speed will be important, so you need to make sure that you've got a kind of shorthand that you understand what you're doing, and you're always going to come up with the technique and the effect. Okay, if you forget one or the other, then you don't get the credit. It needs to be the full package. So straight away you're picking up the religious language. Okay, so all I'm doing is circling all the ideas that have to do with religion in that first section. Now this is clearly using the same idea over and over again. So it's not just a metaphor, it's an extended metaphor of Romeo being a pilgrim, Juliet is the saint. When you get a lot of words that deal with the same area, but you're not actually kind of saying, look, I am comparing this to, you're talking about a semantic field. So he uses the semantic field of religion. Okay? If actually he is comparing his immediate love for her with a religion, with Christianity, think about the effect of that. Think about the connotations. So you've actually got worship, she is pure, holy, he is devoted. Okay, so straight away, he is putting her in a position of being incredibly valuable to him, not just emotionally, but also spiritually. He is putting his faith in her. Okay. The idea looking here that it's shared, you'd comment on. And also in terms of characterization, looking at what this is saying about Romeo and about Juliet. So Romeo, really intelligent, he's quick-witted, and he actually is combining that spiritual love with physical. And that is important in Romeo and Juliet's relationship, that actually they don't just have a sort of pure love where they don't ever touch each other, and they don't just have a relationship where they have sex and don't care about each other. They have the best of both worlds. Okay, most of the other characters can only really see one or the other, or they don't understand it. Romeo and Juliet get the best they possibly can out of both emotional and physical connections. From Juliet, she actually is able to adopt his metaphor, and she develops it. She is also slightly more reserved. She has slightly more idea of modesty and decorum. Okay, if you are modest, it means you are kind of shy, you're not putting yourself forward, you are behaving properly. Decorum is a way of saying you behave according to the rules, you have a sense of dignity and sort of quiet behaviour and doing things right about you. Okay. So you can talk about how the lines characterise Romeo and Juliet. Whenever you get in an extract this, okay, that O, and it happens twice there, that is called apostrophe. And it's spelt the same as the punctuation mark. It normally indicates intense emotion. Okay, so the fact that Romeo repeatedly uses apostrophe equals the intensity of his emotion. Okay, he calls her a dear saint. He asks to be allowed to touch her, and he compares, so the contrast in that line, you've got the contrast, faith turned to despair. It shows how much he wants to talk to her, how much he wants to kiss her. Okay, again, Juliet extends all the way through. He is being quite bold there, and she reacts in a way again which is intelligent and witty. Okay. Look again, you've got that idea of sweetness, the idea of love being sweet but turning to poison would remind the audience of Tybalt's threat. So there is an element of foreshadowing again, that actually this is reminding the audience that sadly Romeo and Juliet's fate is going to be caught up in their love. And we talked before about the two potential meanings and the ambiguity of You Kissed by the Book. So the next stage then of planning your essay, you've looked at the extract, you've annotated up. There's probably much more than 30% if you look at all of those notes, but you're going to get 30%. What I did next then is I looked through the rest of Act 1. And it's important when you get a chance to plan an essay that you do this to get the best possible foundation for your revision. Okay, this is something that you do need to plan. So these are my notes on the different types of love that I've found in Act 1 with some quotations. Here, this was just some notes on the shared sonnet. It kind of echoes what we said before. It's a shared sonnet, it's a regular rhyme scheme. A sonnet is an idealised poetic form that deals with love. Okay, so this idea that it deals with a sort of perfect type of love is important for Romeo and Juliet. I've made a note of the word sort of unrequited because here I've put Shakespeare manipulates convention. Now, if you're aiming for a 6 or above, understanding that idea and maybe making a note of that phrase is useful because Shakespeare takes what the standard thing is, what the rule is, what the convention is, and then he twists it a bit. This is not about unrequited love. In fact, it goes so far the other way that it's got both characters speaking to each other. The audience for the rest of the play might be aware that the prologue was also a sonnet. This means that actually the 2 sonnets so far, one deals with fate and death, the second one, this one, deals with love. You get that link made in form. I mentioned before slightly that this sonnet, coming immediately after Tybalt's rage and his promise, sows the seeds for the tragedy later on. And here, these were just my notes when I was thinking. It says Romeo is more active. He demonstrates rhetorical skill. It's him inventing the metaphor. They both have rhetorical skill, but he sets it up. Juliet's more hesitant. She matches his intelligence in rhetoric, but she holds back a little bit. Like, she's aware of her position, AO3. She's aware of the ways that she needs to behave as a young woman. Kissed by the Book's ambiguous, we've got that. She's more insightful, he gets caught up in the moment. That's going to be a key factor for them both throughout the play. She holds back a little bit more, she's a bit more reserved, he kind of runs away with the emotion of the moment. So I made myself some notes from Love in Act 1, and what I did was I went through the play. Okay, you can't replace the idea of going through the play, getting to know it really well. Same with Inspector Calls, same with the poems. Work with them, it will help you hugely. So first mentions are kind of physical. Okay, so you've got Samson and Gregory referring to sex, basically. So the first mentions of kind of love are more crude. I am a pretty piece of flesh. He's talking about physical relationships, sex, and ultimately rape rather than love. So love isn't established as something that's romantic. Verona is set up as somewhere where actually there is this slightly threatening edge. Romeo is in a grove of sycamore. Okay, we talked about sick amour, sick of love. Whenever you see a page reference, it's a page reference in our edition. Love, or what Romeo thinks is love, is having a negative effect on him. Lord Montague calls him his heavy son, talks about deep sighs. And the type of love that Romeo is first experiencing, or thinks he's experiencing, the characters are worried about him. It's not right, okay? It's not proper, true love. Remember, Lord Montague says, black and portentous, so black and bad luck must this humour prove, unless good counsel may the cause remove, when he's advising Benvolio. And you've got that couplet that shows his certainty that this is not a good thing. Again, foreshadowing the tragedy. A quote, again, which is really useful for the wrong type of love and foreshadowing tragedy, is that simile when Lord Montague compares his son to the bird bit with an envious worm. The bud bit with an envious worm. The idea that Romeo is a flower who's not going to get to blossom because he's going to be eaten up before then. So that might be a paragraph on the wrong type of love. Next thing, looked at Romeo's earlier attitude to love. When he's in love with, or when he's infatuated. Okay, infatuated means obsessed, and not in a good way, in kind of a slightly stalkery way. When he's infatuated with Rosaline, he's all confused. Oh, brawling love, oh, loving hate. He's using oxymorons. Right? He calls love a choking gall, so a choking poison and a preserving sweet. That is a metaphor. Okay, so you might want to say that Romeo uses imagery, both similes and metaphors, to show the confusion that the wrong type of love has brought into his life. He also doesn't view it as even. He views it as unequal. He refers to Rosaline almost holding out when she's under attack. He says that he has hit her with a siege of loving terms. He sees love as a conquest, not as a joint experience. So again, that's on page 11 if you wanted to look at it. And also, he is too extreme. On page 16, when he's talking to Benvolio, he says he's never going to give Rosaline up. And he says that it'll be, the end of the world when he does. So when the dedicated religion of mine eye maintains such falsehood, such lies, that Rosaline isn't the only girl for him, then turn tears to fires. So he's too extreme. Another paragraph here, so a new paragraph, would be Juliet's view of love. And Juliet is surrounded by alternative views of love that are not the right ones. She has the right idea. The nurse just talks about sex. Think about that falling on your face. You'll learn to fall back when you have more wit. The nurse deals with bawdy humour, so that's rude, and physical love. Lady Capulet, when she talks about Paris, uses an extended metaphor that Paris is a precious book of love. And she says that actually, if Paris is a book of love, he lacks a cover. Okay, the only thing he's missing is a cover, is a wife, but also is a decoration. So you could do a paragraph that the nurse's colloquial language, her bawdy humour referring to Juliet falling on her back, quote, when she has, quote, more wit, unquote, is only physical love, whereas Lady Capulet, it may be more refined, it may be kind of less rude, but she is looking at love as a decoration. She is looking at a wife for appearance rather than for that connection with a soul, with a spirit. Juliet has the right idea on page 20. She says she'll look at Paris. I'll look to like. I'll be open to the idea. And if you remember, she then talks about how she'll no further dart her eyes. She won't let her eyes sink in any further than is proper. You can talk about Mercutio, again developing that idea. You might want to link him with the nurse. He says, be rough with love. If love is love with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down. So he just views as love as something to be kind of mastered, to be kind of dealt with abruptly. Then you get the difference on page 27 of our version when R and J first meet, when Romeo and Juliet first meet. Again, remember, what is that called? Told you earlier in the video. And what does it show? Juliet is automatically compared to light. You could talk about the plosive alliteration there, also indicating intense feeling. However, and if you're aiming for 6 or above, this is a good point for you. If you can get your head around it anyway, it's really useful because it's a nice kind of sophisticated point. Even the first time Romeo sees Juliet, he refers to the fact she has beauty too rich and is for earth too dear. You can argue this is foreshadowing the tragedy. Even if you think back to Lord Capulet, he's worried about things being too soon. Later on in the play, when Romeo and Juliet meet in the balcony scene, she says it is too fast, it's too ill-advised. A lot of the time, characters are worried, or Juliet especially is associated with worry about extremes. Are they moving too fast? Friar Lawrence, later in the play, gives warnings about violent ends for delights that have come about too quickly. It's this idea that actually there's something dangerous in the speed of this. And also that Juliet is too good for this life, that she has, she's going to be destroyed early because she's too good. This idea of two all the time. And finally, they realise that although their love is pure, page 30, Juliet says, "My only love sprung from my only hate." So it's both extremes, it's personal, and there is the contrast in that line, which basically encapsulates the problem of the play, their love and the family's hate. You might want to finish your essay with a reference to the fact that Act 1 ends at the idea of now Romeo is beloved and loves again. So Act 1 ends on a note of new love. Hopefully you've understood that. If you haven't, do ask me about any elements. But from this, you should have a fully annotated up version of the extract, that first sonnet, and you should also have some notes about love elsewhere in the play. If you're using study guides or online guides or have your own ideas or using class notes, please do also add material to that. I'll be really happy if I can see some new ideas or some other ideas added in.